My name is Alara Vance and I had everything I ever wanted. A lifetime with the man I loved, a family and a love story that was the envy of everyone who knew us. Leo and I were the golden couple. We held hands on our deathbeds, our wrinkled fingers intertwined, and whispered promises of finding each other again in the next life. It was our final, most sacred vow. When I opened my eyes, the world was bright, sharp, and young. The air felt different in my lungs, cleaner, full of potential. I was back. I was truly young again. The euphoria was instantaneous, a dizzying rush of pure joy. I remembered the date instantly. This was the day I was supposed to formally introduce Leo to my parents. In my first life they had been hesitant about him, a brilliant but poor young man. Our plan was a simple dinner, a chance for him to win them over with his charm and intellect. I was so excited I could barely breathe. I rushed to my father begging him to arrange the dinner to invite Leo. He agreed, but there was a strange hesitation in his eyes, a shadow I was too blissful to notice. My mother helped me get ready. I chose the white sundress he once said made me look like an angel, and I fastened the simple silver locket around my neck, the one he had given me as a token of his love a lifetime ago. I was recreating our beginning, ready to step into our beautiful future. We arrived at the restaurant, a place far more upscale than the one from our original timeline. My parents were tense. I chalked it up to their old reservations. And then he walked in. My heart soared at the sight of him. He was just as handsome, but there was a new confidence in his stride, a sharpness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. But my smile froze on my face. He wasn't alone. On his arm was Clara, a girl from his hometown. And Clara's hand rested gently on a distinctly rounded belly. The world tilted. Leo's eyes met mine and they held no warmth, no recognition, only a stern warning. He pulled out a chair for Clara with a tenderness that felt like a physical blow. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice the same smooth baritone but the words were alien. "Thank you for the invitation. I hope you don't mind, but I couldn't leave Clara alone in her condition." My father looked like he was sitting on a bed of nails. My mother's smile was strained enough to crack. I just sat there, my carefully chosen dress feeling like a costume, the locket a heavy, foolish weight against my collarbone. Clara smiled sweetly, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Alara, you look so beautiful today. So exquisite." The mockery in her voice was a subtle, poisonous thing. She was painting me as the desperate other woman, all dressed up with nowhere to go. My fingers clenched around my chopsticks until they turned white. Under the table, my mother's hand found mine, her whisper a desperate plea. "Alara, his fiancée is pregnant. Let's just give up, okay? We can find someone else for you to like." The dinner was a torturous performance. Leo announced their wedding was next month, his voice filled with a joy I remembered was once reserved for me. He looked at me again, his gaze cold and distant. "Miss Vance, Clara and I are about to be married. Please don't come and disturb us anymore." He was drawing a line not just between us but between our families. He spoke of the support my parents had given him in what should have been his past, calling it a simple investment, a bet on his future that he had more than repaid. There was no gratitude, only a cold, transactional finality. I excused myself and fled to the restroom, my vision blurring. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at the ghost of my young self in the mirror. How could the same day, the same starting point, lead to such a devastatingly different outcome? The answer came the moment I turned around. Clara was there, her sweet facade gone, replaced by a mask of arrogant triumph. The slap was so fast and sharp I tasted blood. "Miss Vance," she sneered, towering over me. "Leo and I belong together. Did you think following him around like a lost puppy would make him choose you?" She flicked her hair. "So what if you helped him a little? You think that buys you a man? Look at yourself. It's just money. And right now the last thing Leo needs is your money." Rage boiled inside me, but I couldn't hit a pregnant woman. When she raised her hand to strike me again, I caught her wrist, my grip like iron. A nasty smile touched her lips. She grabbed my hand, swung it against her own cheek with a loud cry, and collapsed to the floor in a practiced, pathetic heap. As if on cue, Leo burst into the room. He saw Clara on the floor, saw me standing over her, and his face contorted with fury. He shoved me hard. My head snapped back and struck the edge of the sink with a sickening crack. Pain exploded through my skull. He was already crouched over Clara, his voice tender as he helped her up. Then he turned his fury on me. Alara Vance, when will you stop being so vicious? She's pregnant. How dare you lay a hand on her? He spat the words, each one a shard of glass in my heart. You need to understand this. Even if there were no Clara, you and I would never be possible. I don't like you. I never have. Stop your one-sided fantasy. He carried Clara out, and over his shoulder she gave me a look of pure, unadulterated victory. I was left on the cold, hard floor, my cheeks stinging, my head throbbing, and my heart shattered into a million pieces. The man I had loved for a lifetime, the man I had died with, had just looked at me with utter hatred. I went home that night and began to dig. And what I found confirmed my darkest suspicion. Leo wasn't the struggling young man he was supposed to be. He was already a rising star in the business world. The projects he was famous for, they were our projects. The ones we had developed together years from now. He had a head start. He had been reborn too, and he had used his knowledge to build his empire without me. And the moment he woke up in this new life, he had run straight to Clara. I thought of his last words to me in our previous life, his promise of a next life together. I remembered finding a note after his death, scribbled with the words, "In the next life I'll marry you." I had always assumed that you was me. Now I knew with chilling certainty that it had never been meant for me at all. The betrayal was so profound it felt like my soul had been hollowed out. He had spent a whole lifetime with me, building a life, a family, a legacy, all while his heart belonged to someone else. He had used my family, used me, and now that he had a chance to do it over, he was casting me aside like yesterday's garbage. My mother found me weeping in my room. She brought me warm milk, her face etched with a pain that mirrored my own. I saw the humiliation my proud parents had endured for my sake at that dinner, and a new resolve hardened within me. Dream or rebirth, it didn't matter. This was my reality now. My parents were my reality. "Mom," I said quietly, my voice raw but steady. "About that marriage alliance you mentioned before. I agreed to it." The days that followed my agreement to the marriage alliance were a blur of controlled chaos. My parents, relieved and overjoyed, moved with an efficiency I hadn't seen in years. The weight of their disappointment and embarrassment from the dinner with Leo had lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Phone calls were made, meetings were scheduled, and our home, which had felt so heavy with my despair, was suddenly filled with a nervous, hopeful energy. I let them handle it all. I was numb, a ship adrift after being shattered on the rocks. My mind was a relentless loop of Leo's cold eyes, Clara's triumphant smirk, and the sickening crack of my head against the sink. The physical bruise on my temple was fading to a yellowish purple, but the one on my soul felt fresh and raw. Bored and seeking a distraction, I scrolled through my social media feed, a modern-day pillory, and there I was. Someone had posted a photo of me from the disastrous dinner. It was a deliberately unflattering angle, catching me with a double chin and my skin looking sallow under the harsh restaurant lighting. I was dressed in my careful, refined white dress, but in this context, it looked desperate and pathetic. The post was from an anonymous account, but the caption was a dead giveaway. Hilarious. "I'm already about to marry my boyfriend and she still comes to a blind date with him, all dressed up like a peacock." The comment section was a feeding frenzy of strangers laughing, mocking my appearance and calling me a shameless husband stealer. My face burned with a fresh wave of humiliation. Not long after, Clara updated her own feed. "Childhood sweethearts are the ones meant to be together," she wrote, accompanied by a photo of her and Leo locked in a deep, intimate kiss. It was a direct provocation. A moment later, a private message popped up on my screen from her. "Sister, recognize your place. Stop dreaming." I stared at the message, my initial shame curdling into cold fury. Her behavior was illogical. As the official fiancé, the victor, why was she so obsessed with me? Unless her goal wasn't just to have Leo, but to sever all ties between him and my family completely. She was ensuring he had no softness, no lingering loyalty that she couldn't control. I thought of the decades I had shared with Leo in my past life. Despite the truth of his feelings now, that shared history, however false it was on his end, felt real to me. And I remembered Clara from that life too. She had been one of the many hometown acquaintances Leo had helped get a job at our company. I had been the one to discover she was leaking information to our competitors. I'd fired her, but out of a misplaced respect for their shared past, I'd never told Leo the full, ugly truth. I'd simply made her disappear from our lives. A sense of grim responsibility settled over me. I would help him one last time. Not for him but for the ghost of the man I thought I knew. I would give him the warning I'd failed to give him before. I dove into the digital world, piecing together fragments of information about Clara's current activities. Using the knowledge of her past methods and cross-referencing subtle clues from business reports and social connections, I began to compile a dossier. It wasn't complete. I didn't have the resources I once commanded, but it was damning. There were traces of secret meetings with Sean Chen, one of Leo's main rivals, strange financial transfers to shell companies, and purchases that didn't align with her supposed profile. I packaged it all into a neat, anonymous file and sent it to Leo's business email. 1 minute later, my phone vibrated violently on the desk. Leo's name flashed on the screen. A bitter smile touched my lips. He knew it was me. I answered saying nothing. Ilara Vance. His voice was a low, furious growl. Don't think I don't know it was you just because you sent it anonymously. I can see right through your pathetic schemes. You can't have me, so you try to slander the woman I love? You're disgusting. The line went dead. I looked at my phone at his name fading from the screen and shrugged. The gesture felt hollow. Believe it or not, that's up to you, I whispered to the empty room. The last fragile thread connecting me to my past life had just been severed. He had chosen his path. He would live with the consequences. The wedding preparations for my own engagement began in earnest. In my previous life, I had planned my wedding to Leo with a feverish, all-consuming passion. I had spent late nights with designers, obsessing over every flower, every thread of lace, every note of music. It was to be the culmination of our love story. Leo had been involved, but his participation had felt dutiful. I had mistaken his calm compliance for steady support. Now I saw it for what it was, indifference. This time I handed everything over to my parents and the team of wedding planners they hired. I attended the meetings, nodded at the right times and offered opinions when asked, but my heart wasn't in it. It felt like I was planning a corporate event for a client I'd never met. The freedom from that emotional investment was strangely liberating. I felt lighter, as if I had put down a burden I'd been carrying for a lifetime. It was during this strange, detached period that I ran into Leo again. My best friend Maya, worried about my listlessness, dragged me out for a night of karaoke. As we walked down the hallway of the upscale club, passing private rooms with thumping bass lines, I heard a familiar, booming laugh. I froze. It was Leo. Maya tugged my arm, but I was rooted to the spot, listening by the slightly ajar door. Heard Mr. Vance actually arranged a blind date for you. Can you believe it? A slurred voice was saying. How thick-skinned is their family? They really think you're still that poor boy from back then. My blood ran cold. Another voice chimed in. They gave you a little support years ago and thought it entitled them to you. Miss Vance really has no shame. Some people just don't know their place. I could picture the scene. Leo holding court, surrounded by his so-called brothers, the same hangers-on from our previous life. Men with little talent but an abundance of sycophancy. But Clara grew up with us, the first voice continued. She and you are childhood sweethearts. That's a bond no outsider could ever come between. I heard the clink of glasses. Leo was clearly enjoying this, basking in their validation. Then a cruder, more drunken voice snickered. But to be fair, Ilara Vance's figure is incredible. Man, just looking at her makes me drool. Leo, come on. You've already got Clara. Why don't you introduce Ilara to me? All of us brothers are still single after all. The room fell silent for a beat. I heard the sharp, definitive clink of a glass being set down, followed by a cold, displeased snort from Leo. The silence that followed was profound, a testament to the authority he now wielded. He enjoyed these displays, this petty power. In our past life, I had been the one to eventually clear these parasites out of our company, playing the villain to save the business he was too sentimentally weak to protect. The door to the room suddenly swung open and a drunk, swaying man stumbled out. Mark, Leo's closest lackey. He saw me and his eyes widened, a lewd grin spreading across his face. Well, Miss Vance. You're here, he slurred, stepping too close. The smell of cheap whiskey washed over me. Why don't you look at me instead? I'm not any worse than Leo. In fact, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a disgusting whisper, I'm bigger in every way. I recoiled, my skin crawling. I was about to shove him away when a figure moved from the shadows beside us. It happened so fast. A hand shot out and slapped Mark hard across the face, the sound echoing in the hallway. Who the hell hit me? Mark roared, clutching his cheek. I turned and saw a man I didn't recognize. He was dressed bizarrely for this venue. A faded red tank top, loose shorts, and a pair of cheap rubber flip-flops. The only hint that he might not be a homeless person who'd wandered in was the solid, understated Rolex on his wrist. He stood with a calm, almost bored posture. Mark, enraged and drunk, lunged at him. The man in flip-flops didn't even flinch. He simply sidestepped and, with a casual grace, used his sandaled foot to stomp on Mark's ankle, sending him crashing to the floor with a howl of pain. The commotion brought the rest of the group pouring out of the private room, Leo at the forefront. They shouted angrily, "Who the hell are you? Mind your own business." The man in the flip-flops stood calmly under the hallway lights, his face sharp and intelligent, his eyes fixed not on the mob but on me. "I'm the one who's taking over," he said, his voice low and clear. The room erupted in wild, derisive laughter. "Oh my God, Miss Vance, you really don't have any standards, do you? You chose someone like this." One of them jeered. "Judging by the look of him, he's not worth more than $20 from head to toe." But then a more perceptive voice, hushed with sudden awe, murmured, "Wait, he looks kind of familiar. I think I saw his photo in one of Leo's old proposals." There was a pause. Isn't he the so-called crown prince of the Ethelred group?" I stole another glance at the man. The crown prince of the Ethelred group? The massive old money conglomerate from the south? His aura of complete unconcern suddenly made sense. Leo's expression shifted from anger to panicked recognition. He quickly stepped forward, his demeanor changing instantly. He pulled out a cigarette, offering it to the man with a placating smile. "Mr. Thorne, my brothers were being thoughtless. Please don't take it to heart." The man Thorne didn't even look at him. His gaze was still locked on me. Leo tried again, glancing nervously between us. "Alaire and I were classmates before. They were just making a little joke." Still Thorne ignored him. He stared straight at me. "Are you coming or not?" he asked, as if we had a prior arrangement. The absurdity of the situation cut through my numbness. "I'll just tell my friend," I said quietly. After a quick word with a stunned Maya, I followed him down the hallway, past the gawking crowd and a seething Leo. We went downstairs and out into the cool night air. He walked over to an electric scooter parked haphazardly by the curb. He straddled it, turning the key. "It's too inconvenient around here," he explained as if reading my mind. "So I had them buy me one on short notice." I put on the spare helmet he handed me and sat on the back seat, holding onto the metal bar behind me. As he navigated the city streets, the wind whipping past us, I found my voice. "Weren't you in Guangdong?" I asked, raising my voice over the hum of the motor. "What are you doing here?" He stiffened for a few seconds before replying, his tone bitter and carried away by the wind. "Someone's getting married. I came to discuss the engagement." My stomach dropped. Of course. Caelan Thorne. The man my parents had chosen. The one I had agreed to marry. This was our first meeting. Caelan Thorne drove his electric scooter with a focus that was entirely at odds with his ridiculous flip-flops. I held onto the metal bar behind me, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. The wind was a physical force, scouring away the lingering disgust from the encounter with Leo and his cronies. It was strangely cathartic. He didn't take me straight home. Instead, he wove through side streets until we ended up at a quiet, tree-lined boulevard, pulling over near a park. He killed the engine and the sudden silence was deafening. "Your parents gave me your photo," he said without preamble, his back still to me. His Mandarin was fluent but carried the distinct, melodic cadence of the South. "I agreed to the alliance. The Ethelred Group has been looking for a strategic entry into your northern markets. Your family's distribution network is impeccable." His bluntness was jarring, but after a lifetime of Leo's hidden agendas, it was also a relief. "So it's just business for you," I stated, not a question. He finally turned his head, his profile sharp in the dim light. "Isn't it for you? After what happened with him?" He didn't say Leo's name, but the contempt was palpable. I thought of my parents' relieved faces, of the public humiliation I needed to escape. "Yes," I said, the word feeling true. "It's just business." A faint, almost imperceptible tension left his shoulders. "Good. Then we understand each other. He restarted the scooter. I'll take you home. When we arrived at my parents' gate, he didn't come in. He simply nodded, a curt, businesslike gesture, and sped off into the night, a lone figure on a silent scooter. I stood there for a long moment, watching him disappear, feeling like I'd just concluded a merger, not a first meeting with my future husband. The next day I was woken by a commotion downstairs. I came down to find my parents in the foyer, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and delight. Kalen Thorne was there, but the man from last night was gone. In his place stood a sharply dressed businessman in a tailored suit, standing next to a gleaming Maybach that looked utterly out of place in our driveway. And he was unloading groceries. "Ah, Ilara, you're awake," my mother said, her voice tinged with a laugh. "Kalen insisted on bringing us some local specialties." Kalen turned, and for a split second, I saw the same intensity in his eyes, now framed by expensive fabric instead of a cheap tank top. He gave me a slight, formal nod. Then he popped the trunk of the Maybach. My jaw nearly hit the marble floor. He pulled out 2 live chickens, their feathers ruffled, clucking indignantly. "Auntie," he said to my mother in his clumsy, earnest Mandarin, "these are free-range chickens my mom raised back home in the countryside. Perfect for soup." My mother, to her credit, beamed. "Oh, how wonderful. So thoughtful." Then he dug out a bundle of dried tangerine peels and what looked like a bunch of gnarly dirt-caked tree roots. "This is 5-finger," he explained seriously. "My great-uncle dug it up in the mountains. Also very good for soup." The scene was so surreal it bordered on comical. The multi-million-dollar car, the aristocratic suitor, and the trunk full of rustic, earthy ingredients. It was the complete opposite of Leo's calculated, polished gifts. There was no pretense here, only a bizarre, genuine desire to provide the best ingredients for a good broth. The sight sparked a memory, a long-forgotten piece of campus lore. I couldn't help it, a laugh escaped my lips. You're the one, aren't you? The Cantonese student who scoured the city for ingredients and then cried when you finally made authentic soup with morel mushrooms." Kalen's face, which had been open and earnest, instantly darkened. He turned around, so suddenly I took a step back. In 2 strides he had me pressed against the wall of the foyer, his body caging me in, his eyes blazing with a jealousy so raw it stole my breath. "You remembered him again, didn't you?" he ground out, his voice low and dangerous. "Is he really that good? Is he the only one you see?" The accusation was so far from the truth it was almost funny. I rose on my tiptoes, trying to put some space between us. "No. I just remembered your soup-making days from university. That's all." The fire in his eyes banked, replaced by a flush that crept up his neck. He released me and turned away, staring fixedly at the clucking chickens in their crate. After a long, silent pause, he murmured, so quietly I almost missed it, "The truth is, that day I cried because I saw you carrying soup to him." The confession hung in the air, simple and devastating. All this time I had been so focused on my own epic tragic love story with Leo, I had never noticed I was a supporting character in someone else's. I had been an object of longing for Kalen Thorne, the legendary soup crier, while I was busy being Leo's devoted fool. Before I could process this, he shook his head as if clearing it and turned back, his business mask firmly back in place. "I will make you soup," he announced, and before my parents or I could protest, he had gathered his rustic treasures and marched into our kitchen, commandeering it with the authority of a master chef. We stood in the doorway watching him. He moved with a practiced efficiency, dealing with the chickens with a startling swiftness that made me look away, then meticulously preparing the herbs. The aroma that soon filled the house was incredible, savory, complex, and comforting. As we sat at the table later, eating the most delicious soup I had ever tasted, I studied him. He was an enigma. A man who could crush a rival with a word, yet took the time to source mountain roots for a pot of soup. A man who rode an electric scooter but arrived in a Maybach. The Crown Prince of Ethelred was nothing like the cold, untouchable figures in the news. He is real. A few days later, the suit and the Maybach were back. We were invited to a high-profile charity gala. When he came to pick me up, he was breathtaking in a tailored tuxedo. The flip-flops were gone, replaced by polished Oxfords. The transformation was complete. "An upgrade," I murmured to myself, allowing a small, genuine smile. At least in this life my eyes wouldn't suffer. He offered me his arm, his gaze appreciative as he took in my gown. You look adequate, he said, the corner of his mouth twitching. I laughed. You clean up nicely yourself, Mr. Thorne. The gala was a glittering affair, a sea of powerful people and soft chatter. And of course, Leo and Claire were there. Leo was receiving the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The host invited him to share his thoughts, and he brought Clara onto the stage, calling her his lucky goddess. The big screen played a montage of their love story, carefully curated photos that painted a picture of destined childhood sweethearts. I sat in the audience, my face a mask of polite indifference, and raised my hands to applaud along with the crowd. Clara's eyes found mine across the room, brimming with provocation. I gave her a slow, deliberate blink, then turned my attention back to Kaelin, who was studying the champagne flute in his hand as if it were a particularly interesting specimen. During the banquet, I found a quiet corner to sample some of the exquisite desserts. I was savoring a delicate passionfruit tart when Clara materialized beside me. Without a word, she stumbled, flinging a full glass of red wine across the front of my pale blue gown. The cold shock of the liquid made me gasp. I looked down in dismay at the ruined, expensive fabric, the dark stains spreading like a wound. Clara clutched my arm tightly, her face a perfect mask of panicked remorse. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Miss Vance. I didn't mean it. It was a performance and a poor one at that. Before I could respond, Leo was there, pulling her hand away from my arm as if my skin were contaminated. There's no need to apologize to her, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He pulled out a checkbook from his inside pocket, scribbled out a figure with a flourish and shoved the check at me. Here, take it. Buy a new one. After all, money is the only thing you know how to use to solve problems. I stared at the check, then at the two of them, and a bubble of hysterical laughter threatened to escape. They were like characters from a bad television drama. Leo's check-signing gesture was so smooth, so practiced. Did he genuinely think this was impressive? Just then, Kaelin returned from a phone call. He took in the scene in an instant. My stained dress, the check in my hand, Leo's smug expression, Clara's fake tears. Whispers began to ripple through the nearby guests. Oh my God, are they filming a drama right now? The dashing Seo falls in love with me. Someone tittered. Even web novels aren't this cliché anymore. Do they really think their performance looks impressive? So tacky. The murmured critiques made Leo's face flush red, then pale. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a realization that his childhood sweetheart's antics were making him a laughingstock in front of the very elite he was trying to impress. Clara clung to his arm, her eyes brimming with fresh, genuine-looking tears. Leo, you have to believe me. I really didn't mean it. I wasn't scheming. But Leo wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Kaelin, who had stepped forward. Kaelin ignored them both. He carefully took a tissue and began dabbing at the jade bracelet on my wrist, the one I had thrown on as an afterthought before leaving the house. The dress is unimportant, Kaelin said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. But Mr. Cooper, the money you gave isn't enough. You dirted the engagement heirloom I gave to the Vance family. I was speechless. This man could be so ruthlessly childish when he was jealous. He continued, his gaze finally lifting to lock with Leo's. It is a family piece. Priceless. You will, of course, be hearing from my lawyers regarding its appraisal and restoration. Leo looked like he'd been slapped. Clara's tears dried up instantly, replaced by panic. Kaelin then turned to me, his expression softening a fraction. This place has lost its appeal. I know a shop that serves excellent snail noodles. Are you hungry? Relief washed over me. Starving, I said. And without a backward glance at the stunned couple we left in our wake, I walked out of the gala on Kaelin Thorne's arm, my wine-stained dress and all, feeling more victorious than I ever had in my previous, perfect life. The snail noodle shop was a world away from the gala's glittering hall. It was small, steamy, and filled with the pungent, addictive aroma of fermented bamboo shoots and spices. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, reflecting off the worn linoleum tables. Kaelin, still in his impeccable tuxedo, looked utterly out of place, yet he navigated the space with an unshakable confidence, securing us a small table in the corner. He ordered for us in fluent but heavily accented Mandarin, discussing the level of spice with the owner like a seasoned regular. I watched him, this man who could switch from a Maybach to an electric scooter, from a black tie gala to a hole-in-the-wall noodle shop witout missing a beat. "You seem at home here," I remarked, wiping down my chopsticks with a paper napkin. He shrugged, loosening his bow tie. "Good food is good food. Status is a flavorless garnish." His eyes met mine. "And you? A Vance heiress in a place like this?" "I'm discovering I prefer real flavors," I said, and I wasn't just talking about the food. Our bowls arrived, brimming with rich, dark broth, chewy rice noodles, pickled greens, and that signature funky scent. I took a tentative bite, then another, the complex, spicy, sour taste exploding on my tongue. It was messy, vibrant, and utterly delicious. For the first time in weeks, I felt fully present, fully alive in a moment. We were halfway through our bowls, slurping contentedly, when the bell above the door jingled. Leo and Clara walked in. The moment they crossed the threshold, both of them wrinkled their noses in unison. Clara brought a hand to her face, muttering, "My God, it stinks in here." Leo's expression was a mixture of profound discomfort and grim determination. He had clearly tracked us down. He guided a reluctant Clara to sit on a plastic stool at the table next to ours, its wobbly legs squeaking in protest. He looked from our happy, focused eating to the chaotic, lively atmosphere of the shop, and the rehearsed apology speech he had prepared seemed to die in his throat. He was a man who thrived on control and polished appearances, and this environment was his antithesis. I could see the internal battle on his face. His next big investment, a crucial partnership, hinged on Kaylin's approval. His pride warred with his ambition, and ambition I knew would always win. At that critical moment, Clara decided to act. She put on her best performance yet. Her face flushed, head bowed, she murmured toward me, I'm sorry." Then she picked up the roll of cheap single-ply toilet paper that served as the shop's napkins, tore off a piece, and raised it to her eyes as if to dab at non-existent tears. Kaylin's reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. He slammed his chopsticks down on the table with a crack that made everyone in the small shop jump. "What are you doing?" he barked, his voice cutting through the humid air. Clara's hand froze mid-air. Leo stared, bewildered. Zane's fury was a tangible force. He put down his own chopsticks, his eyes fixed on the torn piece of tissue in Clara's hand, his face a mask of genuine, outraged anger. "Who told you to tear that?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Clara stammered, I was just... "We are supposed to return it," he snapped, pointing a rigid finger at the still intact roll of paper on our table. "If you've opened it, how can we return it now? This is not a disposable product." A stunned silence blanketed the shop. Even the owner had stopped stirring his pots to watch. Leo and Clara were utterly flummoxed, their faces flushing with a mixture of confusion and deep embarrassment. Clara, recovering slightly, dared to mumble under her breath, "It's just $2. Kaylin leaned forward, his gaze pinning her to the spot. "So what if it's $2? $2 is still an unnecessary expense. Extra spending is wasteful. If this is your idea of financial management, Mr. Cooper," he turned his piercing gaze to Leo, "then our companies really are not suited to work together. A partner who is careless with small resources will be reckless with large ones." Panic flashed in Leo's eyes. All his carefully laid plans were crumbling over a $2 roll of toilet paper. No, Mr. Thorne. We didn't mean that," he sputtered, his composure shattering. "We both grew up poor. We'd never be so careless and wasteful." The words were a desperate attempt to find common ground, to align himself with Kaylin's bizarre but fiercely held principle. He then turned to Clara, his voice tight with urgency. "Apologize to Mr. Thorne. Now." Clara's face burned with a humiliation so profound I almost felt sorry for her. The triumph she'd felt at the gala was now ashes. With a nasal, choked tone, she forced out the words, "I'm sorry," before grabbing her purse and rushing out of the shop in a flood of real tears. For the first time, Leo didn't chase after her. He sat frozen on the wobbly stool, a statue of defeat, waiting for Kaylin to pass judgment. Kaylin, meanwhile, had calmly picked up his chopsticks and finished the last sip of his soup. He placed the bowl down with a definitive click. "Go back, Mr. Cooper. Our company has its own standard procedures. If your proposal meets the requirements, the partnership will be yours. I won't block you just because of my relationship with Alara." He paused, letting the hope flicker in Leo's eyes before extinguishing it. "But Mr. Cooper, we are different. In our company things are clear-cut. We value prudence. We abhor waste. The words left Leo's face turning a mottled red and then a sickly pale. He had been judged and found lacking on a fundamental level he didn't even understand. When Leo still didn't move, Kalen grew visibly impatient. "Why are you still sitting there?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "Do you expect me to treat you to dinner?" He gestured to our empty bowls. "Forget it. I'm packing up the leftovers. If you want to eat, go buy your own." The sheer audacity of it. The crown prince of the Ethelred group seriously contemplating taking leftover snail noodle soup in a doggy bag, was the final surreal nail in the coffin of Leo's evening. He finally stood up, his pride in tatters, and walked out of the shop without another word. Throughout the entire exchange I had focused on my bowl of noodles, the spicy broth warming me from the inside out. Funny, I thought as I watched Kalen meticulously ask the owner for a container. I had never realized how grounding, how satisfying, a simple bowl of noodles could be. After we finished, I waited by the door while Kalen went to fetch the car. The night air was cool on my skin. I was leaning against the brick wall, lost in thought, when a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Leo. He had been waiting. He approached me, his posture strangely formal. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice strained with a politeness that felt alien. "I didn't get the chance to say this earlier. I actually wanted to bring Clara to apologize to you properly." He took a breath, steeling himself. "Both of us come from humble backgrounds. We don't know anything about those scheming tricks of wealthy families. Clara, she has such a pure personality. She really didn't do it on purpose. She's not like the rest of you." The audacity of his delusion was breathtaking. I gave him a cool, sharp smile. "Oh, then what kind of person am I?" He froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had no answer that wouldn't incriminate himself. I spoke for him, my voice steady. "Someone who humiliates others with money? But weren't you the one who tried to humiliate me with a check that day?" Hearing the truth laid so bare, Leo's carefully reconstructed composure cracked. "Elara," he said, his voice dropping its polite facade, "I know everything you've done is just to provoke me to get my attention. But in my heart there's only Clara. Please stop targeting us." I felt a genuine laugh bubble up, devoid of any humor. Who exactly was targeting whom, Leo? Who crashed whose engagement dinner? Who had their fiancé slap and frame me in a bathroom? He plowed on, lost in his own narrative. "If you really want to spite me, then you should at least find someone suitable. Kalen Thorne isn't right for you." He gestured vaguely toward the shop. "Take food for example. His people love sweets and can't handle spice, but you live for spicy food. Think about it. If you marry into his family, could you really live happily? You're fundamentally incompatible." This time I actually laughed. I laughed so hard that tears welled in my eyes, tears of release and long overdue clarity. When I could finally speak, I looked straight at him, at the man I had built a lifetime around. "Leo," I said, my voice clear and firm, carrying in the quiet street. "I've always loved sweets. Back then I only changed my taste because you loved spicy food. I pretended for you. For decades. If you'd ever bothered to ask about my eating habits to actually see me, you would have known I don't eat spicy food at all. I let the truth hang between us, stark and undeniable. Maybe the truth is you never cared enough to look." The impact of my words was physical. His body swayed slightly. Realization, slow and dawning, flickered across his face. The realization that the woman he thought he knew was a construct, a mirror reflecting his own desires back at him. I nodded slowly, my gaze unwavering. "That's right. I was reborn too." His eyes widened. He closed them for a long time as if processing the cataclysm. When he opened them again, they were hard. "So what?" he said, his voice low and defiant. "I don't regret it. I never wronged you. In our past life, besides you, I had no other woman. I was loyal to the company. I was faithful to you. What I owed you, I already repaid in full in that lifetime." He took a step closer, his words a torrent of long-suppressed bitterness. "I was weighed down by your family's so-called kindness. I had no choice but to repay you. All while enduring people calling me a freeloader. But the truth is, I never loved you. Every time I looked at your face, I had to force back my disgust just to stay with you. In this life, I only want to choose the person I truly like." A leaf skittered across the pavement between us. the sound like the snapping of a final fragile thread. I felt a profound calm settle over me. The pain was gone, replaced by a clean, cold emptiness. I never expected repayment for kindness, I said, my voice eerily calm. If you didn't like me, you could have rejected me. I would never have forced you. But you didn't. Because you knew that if you turned me down, you'd lose the comfortable life that came afterward. You loved Clara in your heart, yet you still married me. You enjoyed my family's resources and the affection I gave you, all while claiming you were trapped by love. I took a final, steadying breath. Leo, stop painting yourself as the victim. You took all the benefits and left all the faults to others, didn't you? I saw the truth of my words hit him, a direct blow to the core of his self-justification. He had no reply. He just stood there exposed. Just then the headlights of the Maybach swept over us. Kaylin had returned. I didn't look back as I walked toward the car, toward my future, leaving my past standing alone and shattered on the dark, empty street. The confrontation with Leo was a watershed. After that night, a heavy, suffocating fog I hadn't even realized was there finally lifted from my life. The ghost of my past was gone, exorcised by the stark, ugly truth. I felt lighter, freer, as if I had been carrying his emotional baggage on my back for 2 lifetimes and had finally set it down. He never contacted me again. I heard snippets through the business grapevine, of course. He was struggling. The partnership with Ethelred hadn't materialized. Kaylin had been true to his word, and Leo's proposal, while competent, lacked the prudence and foresight Ethelred's board now deemed essential, a clear reflection of Kaylin's influence. It seemed the $2 principle had cost Leo far more than $2. It was ironic. In our previous life, his success had been inextricably linked to my instincts, my judgment honed from years of being my father's shadow and later, the silent strategist behind our throne. I was the one who could read the subtle shifts in the market, who remembered the offhand gossip from charity galas that hinted at future trends. Leo was the brilliant executor, the charismatic frontman, but the initial spark, the foundational strategy, had often been mine. Now, flying solo with only his memories of our shared successes, he was rigid, unable to adapt to a world that was changing in small but significant ways. My life, in contrast, was settling into a new, surprisingly pleasant rhythm. Kaylin was a constant, if unpredictable, presence. Our business engagement had developed quirks. He still showed up at my parents' door with bizarre regional delicacies, though the live poultry had been politely discouraged after the incident with my mother's prized roses. He'd replaced them with exotic fruits, artisanal teas, and once, a case of fermented bean curd that could have been classified as a biological weapon. My father, initially wary of the southern upstart, had been won over by Kaylin's blunt intelligence and his surprising knowledge of northern supply chain logistics. They would spend hours in the study talking business while I listened, occasionally offering an insight that would make Kaylin look at me with a new, appraising respect. The wedding preparations continued, but my detachment had faded. It was no longer a corporate event. With the shadow of Leo gone, I began to see the details. The floral arrangements, the music, the menu, not as tasks but as choices for my own future. I found myself genuinely considering Kaylin's preferences. I learned he had a sweet tooth, so I vetoed the bitter dark chocolate fountain in favor of a cascading display of delicate Cantonese pastries and a mountain of fresh lychees. Felt collaborative. It was in this new headspace that we attended the annual grand auction, a high-stakes event where old money and new fortunes clashed over everything from rare art to bankrupt properties. I knew, with a chilling certainty that came from lived experience, that Clara was about to make her move. Because I saw him. Sean Chen, Leo's most ruthless rival, the man I was now sure was the master pulling Clara's strings. He stood across the room, a glass of champagne in hand, his eyes occasionally flicking toward Leo with the cold patience of a predator. The moment Leo saw me, his entire body tensed. He looked like a man facing a mortal enemy. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that I had come to sabotage him. In our previous life, this very auction had been a pivotal moment. I had convinced him to buy a derelict shopping mall that everyone else was ignoring. At the time it was a white elephant, but I'd pieced together whispers from my social circle about a major supermarket chain looking for a flagship location. We bought it for a song, and a year later, its value had skyrocketed, cementing our early fortune. It was one of our first great triumphs, a story we'd told for years. From the way Leo was glaring at me, clutching his paddle like a weapon, he was here for that mall. He was going to repeat history and use it as his springboard back to the top. He strode over, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Are you going to compete with me?" he hissed, keeping his voice low. "I'm telling you, Alara, I'll take this property no matter what. Even with Thorne's money you won't win. It's mine." I looked at him, this man so enslaved by his memories of the past that he was blind to the present. I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite pity but a profound weariness. "I'm not here for the mall, Leo," I said quietly. I turned my back on him and gently guided Kaylin toward the other side of the hall. I wasn't lying. My target was a small, unassuming lot coming up later. A simple jade leaf pendant. It wasn't particularly valuable, but it was a perfect replica of the one my grandmother had worn every day of her life. In my first life I had let it pass, deeming it an unnecessary sentimental expense when company funds were tight for the mall investment. I had regretted it for years. This time it was the only thing I wanted. The jade leaf wasn't eye-catching and I won it with a single modest bid. I felt a surge of simple, uncomplicated joy as the small velvet box was handed to me. It was a piece of my own history reclaimed. Meanwhile, the bankrupt mall came up for bidding. Leo immediately threw out a number that was already triple what we had paid in our previous life, his eyes glued to me, waiting for me to counter. When I didn't even look up from examining my pendant, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. But then Sean Chen's paddle went up and the game was on. Clara was at Leo's side, her hand on his arm, her voice a constant, urgent whisper in his ear, goading him, pushing him to bid higher to not let Sean win. I could see the conflict in Leo's eyes, the memory of our past success warring with the exorbitant price. But Clara's pressure and his own desperate need to validate his reborn existence won out. His offers climbed, each one more reckless than the last. Soon the price had soared to 10, then 15 times the original amount. The other bidders had long since dropped out, leaving it a battle between Leo and Sean's proxy. The auctioneer was ecstatic. Leo, sweat beading on his temple, was now convinced more than ever of the property's extraordinary hidden value. Why else would Sean be fighting so hard for it? But I knew the truth. Sean wasn't fighting for it, he was baiting him. Because in this life, a critical variable had changed. Kaylin Thorne. The Ethelred Group's massive strategic shift north had attracted that very same supermarket chain, which had just signed an exclusive long-term contract to be the anchor tenant in a new Ethelred-owned development in Guangdong. The news wasn't public yet, but it was an open secret in the highest circles. This mall was now just a bankrupt property in a saturated market with no future anchor tenant. It was a lead weight. Leo, relying solely on his outdated memories, was buying a trap. When the price hit 20 times its previous life value, Clara finally pulled back, a tiny, satisfied smile playing on her lips. Sean's representative gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head and sat down. The gavel fell. The mall was Leo's. The look on his face was a complex cocktail of triumph, exhaustion, and dawning terror as the financial reality of his bid began to sink in. His eyes shot to me, full of accusation, as if I had somehow orchestrated this. But the truth was simpler and far more damning. No one had hidden the supermarket news from him. He had been so busy fighting the ghosts of his past, he had failed to read the headlines of the present. He had depended on a map from a previous journey, not realizing the landscape had irrevocably changed. In business as in life, relying solely on the past is a sure path to ruin. And as I clutched my grandmother's jade leaf in my hand, I felt the last vestiges of my own past finally release me. I was moving forward unburdened while Leo was now shackled more than ever to his. The fallout from the auction was swift and brutal. Leo's company, over-leveraged and staking everything on the miraculous resurrection of that mall, was now teetering on the brink. The public announcement of the supermarket chain's exclusive deal with Ethelred was the final, decisive blow. The property wasn't just a bad investment, it was a catastrophic anchor dragging his entire empire into the depths. I watched from a distance, my feelings a complex mix of residual sadness and cold vindication. The news channels were merciless. The entrepreneur of the year was now the punchline of every financial commentator's joke. A cautionary tale in arrogance, one said. A man who believed his own press and forgot to read the fine print, sneered another. Through it all, Clara was conspicuously absent from the narrative. Her social media, once a constant stream of loved-up photos and not-so-subtle digs at me, went silent. It was as if she had vanished. It was Kalen, with his vast and unervingly efficient network, who brought me the final pieces of the puzzle. We were in his temporary study, a room filled with the scent of sandalwood and the quiet hum of high-end electronics. He slid a tablet across the desk to me. "Shanchin," he said simply. On the screen were financial records, flight manifests, and grainy photos. It was all there. Clara had been on Sean's payroll for over a year. She was never the innocent childhood sweetheart. She was a corporate spy, planted to ensure Leo's destruction from within. The whispered advice, the goading at the auction, the entire pure personality act. It was all a meticulously crafted performance. The baby, the doctors confirmed after a miscarriage she suffered shortly after the auction, hadn't even been Leo's. I stared at the evidence, the final layer of the onion peeled back to reveal the rotten core. There was no shock left in me, only a weary confirmation. "He was so blind," I whispered. "He saw what he wanted to see," Kalen replied, his voice devoid of judgment. "A man desperate to rewrite his past will often ignore the reality of his present." A week later, as I was leaving a final dress fitting for my wedding dress, a sleek, modern gown far removed from the ornate one I'd worn in my first life, I found Leo waiting for me in the parking lot. He was a ghost of his former self. His suit was rumpled, his eyes shadowed with a desperate exhaustion. But he had made an effort. He was wearing the same casual jacket and jeans he'd often worn during our early dates in the previous life, and he was clutching a single, slightly wilted red rose. The sight was so pathetic it was almost painful. "Elara," he began, his voice raspy. "I was wrong." He thrust the rose toward me. "I finally realize now that you're the only one who truly loved me. You were always the one. Please forgive me. Don't marry him. We can get married again just like in our last life. We can be together forever." He was still living in his fantasy, still trying to recast me in the role of his devoted wife now that his other script had fallen apart. He wasn't asking for me, he was asking for a lifeline back to a comfortable, familiar narrative. Before I could even form a response, a helmet smacked him squarely on the back of the head with a dull thwack. "Seriously?" Kalen's voice cut through the evening air. He was leaning against his scooter, having pulled up silently behind us. He wasn't in his suit, but back in his uniform of tank top and shorts, though the flip-flops were absent. "Are you acting out another one of those cheesy CEO dramas again? I told you this stuff is outdated. Go uninstall all those corny romance apps already." The sheer absurdity of the moment, the perfect deflation of Leo's grand, tragic plea, was too much. A genuine laugh escaped my lips. Leo looked from Kalen's disdainful face to my amused one, and the last vestiges of his pride seemed to crumble into dust. He dropped the rose, turned, and shuffled away without another word, a broken man finally understanding that there was no going back. Kalen watched him go, then picked up his helmet. "He's not worth your laughter either," he said, his tone softer now. He looked at me, really looked at me. "You deserve a real story, Elara. Not a rerun." In that moment something shifted between us. The business arrangement felt very, very far away. I married Kalen Thorne in a wedding that was a perfect blend of northern grandeur and southern subtlety. It was not the fairy tale I had once dreamed of with Leo. It was something better. It was real. My parents were beaming, their joy untainted by any reservation. Kalen's family, a boisterous and warm-hearted contingent from the south, filled the venue with laughter and the rustle of expensive silk. Leo, I heard later, had tried to crash the ceremony. He never made it past the gate. My bridesmaids, a fierce squad led by Maya and Kalen's groomsmen, a collection of sharp-eyed business associates who looked more like a special forces team, had gently escorted him off the premises. The details were hazy, but the words "beaten half to death" were used. As he staggered away from the wedding venue, bruised and humiliated, he was met by a different group of men, his debt collectors. They administered a second, more thorough beating. The life he had built so quickly in this new timeline collapsed just as fast. He was forced to sell off assets at fire sale prices to cover his catastrophic debts. Everyone assumed he was regrouping, planning a dramatic comeback. They were wrong. He liquidated everything, but instead of reinvesting, he spent the money on a different kind of venture. He became obsessed. He hired teams of theoretical physicists, fringe philosophers, and even a few outright charlatans, pouring his remaining fortune into researching the secrets of rebirth and time travel. He wasn't trying to save his company, he was trying to escape his life. He wanted a third chance, a new save point to correct the mistakes of his second playthrough. The business world wrote him off as a madman. His mind, once so sharp and focused, deteriorated under the weight of his obsession and failure. His parents, simple people from his hometown who had never asked for any of this, eventually came and took their broken son back to the countryside to care for him. The brilliant rising star was extinguished, not with a bang but with a delusional whimper. Meanwhile, Clara's story reached its own conclusion. Restless and realizing Sean Chin had no intention of making her his wife, she returned from abroad and launched a full-scale campaign to force him into marriage. She used every tactic: public scenes, private tantrums, threats of exposure. For a while it worked. Sean, worn down and distracted, saw his company's stock price plummet amid the scandal. It was from his new quiet life in the countryside that Leo saw his final opportunity for a twisted form of revenge. He anonymously sent every piece of evidence he had gathered on Clara's espionage to the authorities and every major media outlet. When Clara was finally arrested for corporate fraud and industrial espionage, it was Leo, the man she had betrayed, who ensured her downfall. The news about Leo's final breakdown reached me on a quiet Sunday morning. Kaylin was in the kitchen of our new home, meticulously preparing a complex broth. The windows were open, letting in the gentle sounds of the city waking up. I stood in the doorway and told him. They took Leo back to the countryside. His parents. He's not well. Kaylin didn't look up from the pot, where he was skimming impurities with a serene focus. He simply nodded. A moment later, a large cockroach scuttled across the pristine marble floor. With a speed that was both startling and efficient, Kaylin kicked off his flip-flop, slammed it down on the insect and crushed it with a final, decisive twist. "Damn thing," he cursed under his breath in Cantonese. "Life force this strong." I was dumbfounded for a moment and then I understood. The cockroach wasn't just a pest. It was a metaphor. It was the last stubborn remnant of my past, the final echo of a life I had left behind. And Kaylin, in his utterly practical, unromantic way, had squashed it. A laugh bubbled up from deep within me, light and free. It was the laugh of a woman who was finally, completely and joyfully present in her own life. He looked up at my laughter, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. "What?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Nothing," I said, walking into the kitchen and wrapping my arms around his waist from behind, resting my cheek against his back. I inhaled the familiar, comforting scent of him, sandalwood and star anise. "The soup smells amazing." He patted my hand, his focus returning to the pot. "It's almost ready. Go set the table." As I laid out the bowls and chopsticks, I thought about the winding, impossible path that had led me here. From a deathbed promise to a humiliating rejection, from a business arrangement to this quiet, solid happiness. This partnership with a man who saw me, who valued my mind, and who wasn't afraid to be his true flip-flop-wearing, soup-obsessed self. Kaylin placed a steaming bowl in front of me. The broth was clear and golden, fragrant with herbs and love. I took a spoonful. It was perfect. It was the taste of my past reconciled, the flavor of a present cherished, and the promise of a future, built not on fantasies of other lives, but on the beautiful, messy, real life I was living right now. The end.